There we go. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Eleanor Rangers. I'm the president of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Cold War Historical Society. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving history through memories of those who created it. And this is our monthly installment of History in Our Backyard webinar series that we've had ongoing since 2012. This also includes some live events that we hold in Warminster, Pennsylvania as well. As a nonprofit organization, we do certainly rely on the donations of those who choose to contribute to our organization. So we are very grateful for that. If you so choose to donate to our organization, we have a donate button conveniently on our website. So you should check us out at coldwarhistory.org. Also, I would encourage folks who are local to the Warminster area. We do have a display room that is I would say 99.9% complete. It is actually right inside the front entrance of the Fuge, which is at 780 Falcon Circle in Warminster. And the room is dedicated to preserving the history and celebrating the history of the Naval Air Development Center, which operated in Warminster for approximately 50 years. So if you happen to be in the area, you should stop on by and check it out. We do record these events, as you know, and we do place them onto our YouTube channel. So they are there for your on-demand viewing. I do try to keep our YouTube channel updated with other content, so it is certainly worthwhile to always periodically take a gander at our site to see what may be up and new on there. I also do maintain a Facebook page as well, to also advertise events that we have and also to post some Cold War newsworthy items as well. So we do get a feed that mirrors the Facebook pages on our website. So if you don't happen to be on that social media platform, you can pick up our posts on our website as well. Coming up next month, actually, we have Stephen Walker returning. Stephen Walker, for those of you who are regular listeners to our webinars, spoke about Yuri Gagarin last year. And actually, we have him coming back in August, timely, to talk about Hiroshima. And that actually is his first book that he wrote several years ago. And I thought he was such a fantastic speaker. I wanted to have him back. So looking forward to that talk in August. And I will talk about our July 20th celebration in a moment. Speaking of which, for those of you who are local or those of you who wish to come to the Warminster area, July 20th, we are going to be having a big open house and celebration at the Fuge in Warminster, Pennsylvania, to celebrate actually two things simultaneously. One, the 65th anniversary of Project Mercury centrifuge training beginning at the old Johnsville centrifuge, and the 55th anniversary of the Apollo 11 lunar landing. We have an open house from 1 to 3 p.m. that will have displays. We'll have tours of the facility. I also have a bonus presentation on the space race that will be made during that time frame. And then at 3 o'clock, our main program will commence. And I'm very fortunate to actually have a couple of things going on. We're going to have a couple of congressional proclamations that are going to be read, basically celebrating the Naval Air Development Center and the broader aerospace heritage of the greater Philadelphia region. And we will have Danny Parker, who is a historian who's in the process of writing a new book about Mercury astronaut Scott Carpenter, giving a keynote address. And we also have a couple of other special guests coming who were involved in Project Mercury. Believe it or not, we actually have one of the psychologists who was involved in selection of the Mercury astronauts, who is still with us. He will be coming with his son. And we have Nancy Lowe, who was a secretary at Langley when the Mercury astronauts were based there in Virginia, who will also be there. And we have Scott Carpenter's daughter, Chris Stover, also making an appearance. So really delighted to have quite a program coming together for the 20th. So definitely would encourage you to attend. It is free. It's open to the public. Bring kids. Very kid-friendly event as well. So just want to put another plug in for that. If you do want more information, feel free to shoot me an email on mail@coldwarhistory.org. Or if you go onto Eventbrite, I do have a page up and running there. If you just go into like Warminster and put Space Race, the event will come up. So just wanted to mention that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker this evening. Many of you may know David Stumpf. He has spoken on this webinar series several times before. And he is a retired plant biochemist living with his wife, Susan, in Tucson, Arizona. And he's written 3 nuclear weapons histories, that Regulus, Minuteman, and Titan II. And actually, we are getting a preview of the content of his next book on hit-to-kill technology coming up next. And there is actually a preview of the cover of his new book, The Last 30 Seconds, which will be published by University of Arkansas Press. And I can let David give you more details about the book and when it's actually going to be released. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to David.
Okay. Okay. I think everything's set up. Well, thank you, Eleanor. It's a pleasure to be back. I always enjoy preparing for these and learn something new about PowerPoint each time I do it. So this is a brief history of hit-to-kill technology.
I don't think you're, oh, hold on. I don't think you're sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, right.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. I'm not going to tell you everything because I want you to buy the book. I'll be upfront about that, but this is a pretty good summary of what's in the book. The hit-to-kill technology intrigued me. I was trying to write a book about the use of Minuteman, leftover Minuteman airframes from when they deactivated Minuteman 1A and B. And I ran up against a bunch of people not interested in interviewing with me because they'd had some sort of a sour grapes end to their careers. So instead, I looked at some of what the missiles were used for as targets for something called hit-to-kill technology. And I thought, well, I don't know much about that. So that's how I got started with this book. Okay. Let me get my cursor where I want it. So in the beginning, in 1958, the Advanced Research Projects Agency was formed. That was quite an event. That was formed because Eisenhower was worried that the services were wasting money because each one wanted to be in space and each one wanted to be in charge of defense against ballistic missiles. So they set up this Advanced Research Projects Agency, which was given responsibility to develop ballistic missile defense and develop outer space. So that kind of curtailed the competition, but not really. In 1960, Project Defender was a review that was formulated in the early 60s, summarizing everything they knew on the subject at the time. And I have kind of an interesting story about that. When I first started looking into this, I saw a reference to Project Defender, and I looked at the chances of it being declassified, and it was still highly classified. So I didn't bother trying to get it declassified because my experience with declassification is, well, it takes forever. For my Minuteman book, a couple of months ago, I got something from the Air Force that was 70% redacted, and I'd waited 9 years for. So I saw another reference a few months later. I thought, well, if you don't try and get it declassified, you'll never know. So I called the contact I have in the declassification office at the National Archives, and I said, can you help me try and find this document? And he said, sure. And he called me back and he said, I found it. And I said, it should be 2 volumes. He goes, yep, that's the good news. The bad news is it's not in the box it's supposed to be in. So I thought, well, that's too bad. And he said, but the good news is there are 2 cards in here telling me where it is. So I'm going to go find it and I'll get back to you. So I went and found it. And he said, yeah, it's still classified. And I said, well, I'm SOL because it takes so long to get things declassified. And he goes, well, don't be so discouraged. So he walked down the hall to his Air Force declassification guy and came back. I was still on the phone. He said, it's yours. How would you like it? And I said, well, I like paper copy if at all possible. And he said, okay, I'll be 85 cents a page for a 1,000-page document. So I said, well, what the hell? I'll just go ahead and do it. So they ended up sending it to the wrong zip code. Now, I don't know how much you know about the US mail. I don't know much, but if it's the wrong zip code, it just gets bounced back to the sending department. So it got within a mile of my house. I was in Malaysia at the time, following all this on email. But long story short, I did get the document. It was glorious, glorious to get. It formed the backbone of everything that came forward. So there's that. So there were 4 challenges that Project Defender listed. There was the idea of launch detection. This is back before satellites and a lot of stuff that we take for granted now. Launch detection, where were we going to try and intercept the missile? Discrimination, how are we going to tell it apart from its decoys? And the kill mechanism, what was going to be the most effective kill mechanism? So launch detection, they developed MIDAS Missile Defense Alarm System, which development began in 1956. And the first successful orbit was in May of 63. That's back in the day when you could have something like this, like Corona and other projects that had failure after failure, but they kept plugging away and made it work. I don't think you'd have that now. So when are you going to intercept it? The point of interception. Phases of ballistic missile trajectory. During the post phase, the boost phase, the missiles accelerated to and out of the atmosphere. The post-boost phase occurs next, during which multiple warheads and penetration aids are released from the post-boost vehicle. In the mid-course phase, the warheads and penetration aids travel on trajectories above the atmosphere. Then they enter in the terminal phase. They re-enter and they're whether affected by atmospheric drag. And that's where you can tell a difference between a decoy and the warhead because of the difference in drag. But by that time, you're 30 seconds away from incoming, so it's a little late. So just out of curiosity, I checked with the Minuteman. Boost phase lasted nearly 3 minutes. At the end of the boost phase, it was 100 nautical miles up and 260 nautical miles downrange. Mid-course phase lasted 25 minutes, and then the terminal phase was approximately 0.5 minutes. So if you're going to spend time looking for the missile, the warhead, mid-course phase made the most sense. Plus, you weren't over enemy territory. If you were trying to look at something in the boost phase, you could possibly have a armed satellite orbiting over a country that wasn't really thrilled with that. So discrimination, sensor development, radar was straightforward. Radar couldn't really detect the difference between decoys and the actual warhead. So they went to infrared and ultraviolet. And it was very interesting. The infrared industry was just starting to grow because of the interest in infrared astronomy. In 1962, a gentleman named I.H. Swift published an article describing a method to enhance the sensitivity of IR photon detectors. And what he did is he found if he cooled it to cryogenic temperatures, then the sensitivity was greatly increased. So all of a sudden, IR detectors made sense and were something that they wanted to work on. The original IR detectors were lead sulfide for wavelengths of between 1 and 3 micrometers, lead, selenium, and indium antinomide for higher wavelengths. But what they found was they didn't really get the results they wanted until 1958. The British researchers had reported that mercury cadmium telluride was hugely successful in sensitivity out to 13 micrometers. But they didn't pursue it further. And 65 researchers at Hughes Aircraft did, and MCT, as it was called, became the standard detector with high sensitivity. So in the beginning, the Operation Gaslight, these were launches of the Jupiter in 1958. They were off the coast of Antigua and to watch the reentry. 13 seconds after reentry began, the RV leads the instrument package. The booster tanks are off the frame. Now, they had a bunch of different detectors, but one of the most successful ones were held on a shotgun type arrangement, and the scientists just aimed by eye at the reentry vehicle dot, and they got some very good information. So back in the day, kill mechanisms, they came up with nuclear, conventional blast fragmentation, and directed energy, and finally kinetic energy. So the thinking process started with nuclear. There were 4 considerations mitigating the use of a nuclear weapon as an interceptor for warheads. The first was the fact that a medium to high yield nuclear weapon detonated at an altitude of 175 nautical miles above the central US would cover, with its primary electromagnetic pulse, the entire United States. So Iran and other countries don't have to land one on LA. They just have to put one 175 miles over Kansas, and a lot of electronics are going to be fried in this country. This would cause both temporary and permanent damage to a wide range of electrical and electronic equipment. And this had been demonstrated during the Operation Fishbowl nuclear test series conducted in '62. I remember hearing something as a kid. So I'm 9 years old, and I hear something about the rainbow bomb. And I think, well, that's weird. A rainbow, how do you make a bomb out of a rainbow? The Starfish Prime experiment, there was a detonation of a 1.4 megaton warhead at an altitude of 210 nautical miles, and that caused the streetlights to fail in Hawaii at a distance of over 600 nautical miles. The second concern was the temporary radiation belt formed by the explosion, which destroyed several satellites. The third consideration was that the explosion would cause a temporary radar blackout that would prevent defensive radar from detecting further incoming reentry vehicles. The fourth concern, originally I thought this was nuts, but I looked it up on the effect of nuclear weapons. And the fourth concern was the extreme brightness of the explosion, that if they occurred from 18 to 45 nautical miles of altitude, this would cause injury to unprotected eyes over a large area, especially at night. So nuclear weapons, not something that's going to happen. Conventional blast fragmentation. Conventional blast fragmentation. They did studies using these sleds at Holloman, the high-speed track at Holloman. I had a chance to go visit that during my research for the book, and I'm just amazed at what they can do out there. They have some really fantastic equipment. What they did was they put warheads on a stand and then drove sleds into them. And what they found was if the sled hit there, then they got 26 killed. If a hit to kill warhead was used, they got 91% killed of these bomblets. So they were concerned about chemical dispersion of chemical warheads. And this indicated to them the best thing they could do is use hit to kill. Directed energy was also considered, laser and neutral particle beam, but these were in their infancy at the time and put it on the shelf. One of the difficulties with electromagnetic launcher was the 100,000 G acceleration a projectile would have to undergo. Simulation showed that the weight of the projectile able to tolerate such acceleration would require an electromagnetic launcher over 300 feet long. And this was going to be in orbit. Combined with the bulky power supply issues, the space-based electromagnetic launcher was abandoned in 1987, and attention turned toward further development of the projectile as an interceptor. This term became, you may have remember the concept called brilliant pebbles for SDI. Brilliant pebbles was nothing more than one of the projectiles for the railgun turned into a smart projectile that could home in on a warhead and destroy it. So deployment solutions, orbital or ground-based. The Project Defender had some really wild ideas about what we could do. This one had tracking satellites, scanning satellites, and then interceptor bases, which would launch against incoming targets. Whoops. So I contacted White Sands because I'd heard they'd done some testing, and I was able to contact the archivist, and she invited me to come out, but she sent me a spreadsheet of everything they had at the time in their inventory. So I just used Excel and I started using keywords, and much to my pleasant surprise, up came 2 responses to something called RPOT. RPOT was the Advanced Research Project Agency Terminal T, so RPOT. And it was the first interceptor that actually made it, the only interceptor that made it into hardware. So it had 2 pictures, and she sent me the 2 pictures, and based on the description in Project Defender, this didn't make any sense. That the long, large object with the number 1, that was listed as the interceptor. Well, the real interceptor at the time was a little falcon-like object in the foreground. So I had some work cut out of me to try and understand what was going on. And luckily enough, I was able to find some reports buried in their archive that described what happened. The Project Defender idea had changed once they started testing the hardware, and it changed into this more, this reminds me of a Falcon. I'm pretty sure it's a Falcon air-to-air missile. So I had 2 pictures that had never seen the light of day, and I knew that I was meant to write this book. Between that and getting the Project Defender information, I knew that fate had it that I was supposed to write this book. So if you're going to try and develop an interceptor, you need to have a database of what the interceptor is going to look at. There were ship-based, aircraft-based, and sounding rockets. The ship-based, the first one was this Liberty ship that was converted, the USAS, the U.S. Army ship, American Mariner, in transit to Cape Town, South Africa, for installation of the L-band radar. Now, you might wonder, why was the Army involved in this? Well, the Army was given the missile defense what I want to call it, responsibility. Much to the Air Force and the Navy's disgruntledness, they were given the responsibility. So they needed to get a ship for tracking. And this is their first one they came up with. Part of the problem with a ship of this size was the metacentric height, which means the height of that heavy antenna and pedestal is up high enough on the ship that if it starts to roll too much, it's just going to keep going. And that was part of the problem with this particular vessel. Aircraft, the KC-135 mid-course airborne target system that lasted from 72 to 74. And it was a specially modified KC-135, which had this telescope. And it was called the mid-course airborne target system, MATS. Now, you kind of think this would be a piece of cake to just track the missile, but in order to be in the right place at the right time, it took a lot of complicated calculations, and they didn't have much in the way of computer power at the time to do this. So it was really, actually, I think one of those, what do they call it, when you're really good at? Oh, you've got the touch. I think they had crews that simply had the touch. The navigator just had the touch on how to do this. So this is a typical flight pan. You can't really see it very well, I'm sorry, but 30-minute climb out of Guam, then 2.5 hours to getting near the target area, 4 hours of waiting for it to be launched, holding patterns, tracking it, then going to Wake Island at the end of the trip. Typical timeline for a MATS mission. The thermal radiation program, the trap aircraft operated out of Anderson Air Force Base. Their home base was Shima Air Force Base, Alaska, Aleutian Islands. The up-to-date version was called Cobra Eye. And this was again a 135 early in its test flight period on the left with a mock-up of this infrared telescope exposed to the atmosphere. On the right is the 20-inch long-wave infrared optical sensor system. This was, I've seen other pictures of this, is an absolutely beautiful piece of equipment. Just is stunning. What man can come up with is, well, as a plant biochemist, I'm very impressed. Then there were the sounding rockets. They'd send up this very much smaller sensor. And these, you can see this. I don't know if you can see my cursor. I don't think you can. Well, here, let's try this. There we go. There's a guy getting into the pedestal on the rail launcher. So they can get an idea of the scale of the sounding rocket. Given time. So the miniature homing vehicle, general description, the Vought company was contracted to develop something they could use as an anti-satellite system. And so they developed a missile. Stage one was a Boeing short-range attack missile motor. Stage two was a LTV Altair motor. And the payload was this miniature homing vehicle. It intercepted a satellite on 13 September 1985, proving the concept of hit to kill, but it wasn't against a ballistic missile trajectory. Part of the problem with the homing vehicle and homing vehicles down the road was the minute adjustment that had to be made in order to make sure of the intercept. And this was the first attempt at a solid propellant maneuvering motor array. And that's really, I haven't seen an original. I've got the drawings, but basically what happened would be these would fire in opposition to each other and increment very small changes in the, they didn't, they lit off at 90 degrees to the flight path. So these weren't in changing velocity, they were changing the direction. So that led to something called the homing overlay experiment from 1975 to 1985. Now, I have a friend who's working in Raytheon here in Tucson, and he works on the EKV, the Exo Atmospheric Kill Vehicle. When I showed him a copy of the homing overlay experiment summary, he couldn't believe that it had been declassified because I was asking him questions that were pertinent to what he was working on that he couldn't answer. So the homing overlay experiment was search, acquisition, and detection. Can there be successful discrimination? Can the onboard system designate a target? Can the homing guidance be accurate enough? And is there a sensor-to-sensor handoff capability, i.e. can ground radar tracking send a message to an interceptor and help it find its target? This is the homing overlay interceptor and booster. It was configured from stage 1 of a Minuteman 1B and stage 2. That was the guidance and detection. That was the propulsion. So at 20.3 feet long and 2,600 pounds was the size of the detector at the beginning. This is an undated photograph of the homing overlay launch vehicle and placed in the launch tent at Mech Island, Kwajalein. The launch ring was 12 feet below the level of the launch pad surface. So that's why it looks a little bit strange if you know your Minutemen. This is the Honeywell tracker sensor assembly. It had multispectral data that was sent to the onboard computer, measuring radiometric intensity and the position of the objects. The hit-to-kill mechanism was backed up by a secondary mechanism. So the first idea was it would be hit by this 20-foot-long device, and that would surely destroy it. But if that didn't work, they had a near-miss capability with what turned out to be a fragment launcher or a fixed fragment net. If you go to the Smithsonian out at the airport and you look up at the ceiling, this is sitting above the Corona satellite, I guess keyhole satellite they have on display. No, it must be a Corona. Anyway, if you look up in the ceiling, you'll see the prototypical net displayed. It's pretty amazing. This is the seeker head, picture taken from the floor. And these are the ribs of the expanded net. So this had a telescope with the sensors. It had the gimbals to keep it centered. And it was pretty crude back then, now, but it was amazing back then in terms of the technology they had at hand. A typical trajectory. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of something launched from Kwajalein or from Vandenberg, I don't really think much about what happens to the first, second, third stages. But they had to make sure they didn't hit anything important. So they had to know where everything was going to go. The experimental results, it demonstrated reentry vehicles could be intercepted and destroyed by a ground-launched interceptor. Long-wave infrared radiation sensors could easily pick up the target. Complex data processing could be performed real-time on board the interceptor. Hitting a bullet with the bullet was decisively demonstrated. So, a brief look at the various weapon systems that use hit-to-kill technology. Patriot Advanced Capability, or PAC-3, Aegis, Theater High Altitude Area Defense. That altitude should have a capital A, my bad. The THAAD system, and the ground-based interceptor. So I'm hoping we're going to have some video that's going to run. PAC-3 launch at White Sands, New Mexico. The DAX is a divert attitude control system. That's those solid propellant, ring of solid propellant rockets to correct the attitude. And then the Sabbats. What happened was they were able to build a missile that fit into a normal Patriot launcher, but they could fit 4 per box instead of just 1. So they needed these Sabbats to keep it centered. This is the radar seeker. I'm just fascinated by the ability to pack this kind of thing in to a missile. It just amazes me. Okay, this is an interception. You can see this is the interceptor getting ready to hit the target. For some reason, I find this film just fascinating. They can actually do this with high-speed film. Okay, it looks like this isn't gonna. Okay, we'll move on.
Yeah, it's being quirky again.
Yeah. So LEAP and lightweight and exoatmospheric projectile. This is the part that I think fascinated me the most, developing these smart projectiles. So there was something called the AHIT vehicle, which I never did find a picture of, which was 71 inches long, 24 inches in diameter, and weighed 330 pounds. LEAP 1, the next generation that was actually serious about being a warhead, was 26 inches in length, an overall diameter of 18 inches, and weighed just 40 pounds. And this, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the model that's under plexiglass in storage at the Smithsonian. It's just a beautiful piece of equipment. So the Army and the Navy didn't get involved. There was LEAP 1, 2, and 3, and this was LEAP 2. LEAP 2 was only 16 inches in length, 6 inches in diameter, and weighed 12.1 pounds. The reduction in weight and dimensions from the AHIT testbed was the result of 2 other programs. Now you say to yourself, so big deal, kinetic kill. Well, early on the Project Defender work, they made the calculations and verified it with tests that at the speeds, the closing speeds of the interceptor and an RB, the weight, the explosive power of the warhead, pound for pound, was 6 times as much as that of a pound of TNT. So they didn't have to worry about a detonating fuse, all those kind of complications. Just smash this thing into the warhead and you'd achieve your purpose. Now, the naysayers said, well, they'll never get it to contact. Well, they were wrong. Okay. They had a National Hover Test Facility that was built at Edwards Air Force Base. And I'm hoping this next slide will, there we come on. That's my girl. Okay, let's see if this will work.
2, 1, hover!
With no pilot to compromise performance, even more unusual craft and propulsion systems have been designed and tested. This incredible machine was originally designed to shoot down nuclear missiles and satellites.
Yeah.
Just 12 inches long,
to
gyroscopically balanced, and with thrusters at key points around its body, it is capable of instant changes of direction.
Hover. Hover. Hover tracking. Hover. Roll. Woo! All right.
No airplane could ever catch this machine.
Emerging through the changes and mergers was the lightweight exoatmospheric projectile, or LEAP program.
Terrier LEAP was developed as a demonstration phase only.
At the end of 1990, another hover test was successfully conducted. Here, the vehicle, with all its controls and lethality, is tiny compared to the first test vehicle. This miniaturization reduces the cost of boosting into space and makes a brilliant pebble truly a pebble and much more difficult to find. One of the most significant SDI tests to date was the full duration flight test of a space-based interceptor soon to become brilliant pebbles. This hover test brought together all the elements of acquisition, tracking, control, and independent operation. This vehicle is tracking a heat.
David, if you were speaking over while that was playing, we were not able to hear you
Oh,
because the volume of the video was so loud. So just to give you a heads up, if I don't know if you want to repeat anything that you talked about.
well, the size changed. You, at the very end, you saw a much larger one. That was the original A-hit device, and that was one of those 71 inches long. It just fascinated me that you could build something like that and have it be controlled to hover. And I guess I'm just blown away by engineering. But that showed that they could control the interceptor, the attitude of the interceptor. Now it's just a matter of getting into the right place in space and time. So here is a typical trajectory for the homing overlay experiment. Navy Raytheon SM-3 warhead, very compact. You can see the seeker assembly at the front lower left and the attitude control mechanisms. Just everything packed into a very tight piece of equipment. This is the SM-3 Block 1A Aegis LEAP. I think that's a pretty good looking missile. This is what a interceptor sees just seconds before hitting the target. So this is an image that's sent back to the ground. This is what the sensors on board see before they hit. And they want to aim, they have the software such that in the profiles, radar profiles, such that they know where to hit on the reentry vehicle to inflict the most damage. And they can actually control what's called the aim point. So it's not success, it's success if it hits the airframe, but it's really great success if it hits where it's supposed to, because that they know will destroy any chemical or bacteriological warfare agent. So that's Aegis. We saw Patriot. THAAD was, these all have different altitudes. And I'm remiss in not having put a chart up about the different altitudes. But different sectors of the interception game were monitored and defended by these missile systems. Okay, this is the THAAD seeker window detail. These are synthetic sapphire windows, 5 millimeters thick. I can't even begin to think what that would cost. But those are on the ground test missile here. The brown color back here is an ablative material because this is still in the atmosphere when it's tracking and it's heated quite high. Now we're on to the ground-based interceptor. Lockheed Martin's IRIS Extended Range Interceptor System, the octagonal kill enhancement device right here was deployed just prior to impact. This is an IRIS missile on the transporter erector that was used in Kwajalein. They didn't modify the silos to take and hold the missile in air-conditioned splendor. So they developed this sheath that had power and coolant running through it that was covering the vehicle, the kill vehicle. Then at launch, the lanyard here would pull away, and now the actual sensor device, interceptor, is exposed, and the missile's off and running. So just to give you some scale to these things, this is the EKV from Boeing, and here's the guy looking at it in some test cell. Now, there's an interesting story behind Boeing. Boeing had the contract for the, what do they call it, the assembly and development of the whole system, but they also had their hand in the foot in the door with their own EKV, and so did Raytheon. And what happened was somehow, and they never did find out how, somehow a document containing the specifications for the Raytheon Northrop device were left at the front door, or maybe it was on a table in some meeting room, and Boeing engineers found it and picked it up. And instead of leaving it, they took it with them. And what happened was, in order to avoid a costly and embarrassing trial about industrial espionage, the deal was Northrop and Raytheon would get the contract and Boeing wouldn't. So it's the first example I've ever heard of industrial espionage. So here's the Raytheon seeker. So what about targets? This was a Storm target launch vehicle. It utilized a Sergeant Stage 1 and a Minuteman Roman numeral 1B Stage 2. Storm 1 could perform as both a ballistic and a tactical target. They came up with this ability to launch targets out of aircraft. Now, the original air launch experiment was with Minuteman 1B back in the October, I think it was 71 timeframe, just to show us that a possible deployment mechanism, which I think, one of these thrown out the back of a C-5A, I mean, that makes no sense to me. But what they did is they developed a series of various capabilities and launched them out the back, targets, and launched them out the back of a C-17. And now that made sense because you could fly C-17 halfway across the Pacific and launch this missile and have it imitate something coming from China or from North Korea. So this is what one looks like if you're inside a C-17 when they're loading it out. Really impressive. I interviewed guys that were involved in these launches, and they said it was a sight to behold. So this is the typical flight plan. And I'm hoping, I have a picture here of what it looks like over the Yuma Proving Ground when they did a drop test. But I'm hoping this next slide will be, oh, there we go. Let's see if we can get this to fly. Oh, come on.
You need to click on it. Sometimes you have to click so it'll, with your cursor, to make it
There
go.
we go. There we go. Now, why this is infrared, I'm not sure. So the extraction chute pulls it out of the C-17. And there goes the missile on the sled. This is all at about 35,000 feet. And it's still, the main chutes have opened, but the extraction chutes are still taking quite a bit of load. Now we're going to see the sled, the pallet release, and then you're going to get lit off. And that's the infrared signature of the first stage, and it climbs away. I think that's pretty amazing. They did a lot of launches off of Alaska in that area to allow the Vandenberg airframes to take off. Launches. I was all ready to film it with my phone, and my freak out when it looks at that much color at night. No idea what that is. So here's the onboard sensor view. So a computer is keeping that, not a guy at a console at Vandenberg. A computer is keeping that image centered or close to centered in the sensor frame, view frame. I just, at 16,000 miles per hour, that's amazing to me. Well, and that is that. So, and I come in at 5:23, so I'm on time. And oops, I have one more. Well, I thought I had one more slide. Oh yeah, one more slide. So, one of my pet peeves is not the systems not getting credit for what they did. And this took a reasonable amount of time and a little more money than I wanted to spend, but I was able to compile the percent rate of success for the different systems. And Aegis was at this time frame between 2008 and 2023, had an 82% success rate. GBI was only 56. I'll talk about that in a minute. PAC-3 was 82. THAAD was 100%. Now, do I have a second? I don't. Okay. So what does this mean? 56%. All the critics go, well, what a waste of money. I look at it this way. if North Korea launches 2 or 3 missiles on the United States and we didn't have the GBI, there would be nothing we could do about it coming into the country. So what if you have to launch 4 GBI interceptors to knock one down? We could knock it down. So to me, it's a no-brainer to have the GBI system. Likewise, these other ones that are theater-based. And talk to the people in Ukraine, talk to the soldiers and sailors and civilians in the Red Sea being attacked by Yemen-based terrorist groups. All of them are being protected by weapon systems that have the hit-to-kill technology. So I think it was money well spent, and the ingenuity of engineers and scientists continue to amaze me. So that's all I've got. If I'd be happy to take some questions if anybody has any.
Wow, fascinating. And what's also interesting is that never cease to underestimate the ingenuity of us figuring out ways to kill each other.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point.
I'm going to start off with some questions. One question occurred to me was, what percentage of our, and I don't know if this is probably classified, but I don't know if you have any rough idea of what percentage of our defense missile capability today is either this defensive hit to kill interceptor technology versus the traditional ballistic missiles, the nukes that we think about. I'm just curious about that.
I don't follow. We have 450, so 450 or 400 ICBMs, Minuteman 3s on alert. And we have 40, GBI, I believe, has 44. I think there are 44 up at Greeley, the Fort Greeley facility in Alaska. And I believe there were 10 at Vandenberg. So we don't have many, but the idea was not to try and defend against China or Russia launching on us, but to defend against North Korea or Iran that would launch 1 or 2 trying to mess up part of the US and being able to successfully defend.
Another question I have is, I'm assuming that this technology is for intercepting non-hypersonic missiles, because I know there's this talk about that China may have actually tested a hypersonic missile and that we don't have any capability of intercepting at this point. Is that true? Like, this hit-to-kill technology is kind of behind in terms of being able to intercept something that's hypersonic? Maybe you can
Well,
help me understand that.
the warhead isn't behind this, it's the boost vehicle. I remember reading that a Patriot, the PAC-3, intercepted what they thought was a Russian hypersonic missile. I tell you, now I'm not an engineer, I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's my personal feeling that hypersonics is a bunch of yammer, and I'm not worried about hypersonics. I think that incremental increase in money spent and weapons decisions, but I don't think it's the end all, because we have defense now and we'll have defense in the future. So that may be me just being naive and accepting that the military is going to solve the problem, but I don't think the Russians have a viable hypersonic capability. Chinese, that's a different story. So that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, John, go ahead. Hi.
Yeah, hi, David. Greetings from Oral Valley. I'm your neighbor here
Oh,
in Arizona. Yeah, I was CIA's ABM analyst back during the Cold War era, and studying some of the Russian missiles capabilities. And I kept track of their hypersonic capabilities, and there is a deployed SS-30, which carries a hypersonic warhead. And the post-boost vehicle can achieve hypersonic speeds of Mach, I think we saw Mach 24, 25, something like that. It was extremely fast. But once the, it's a unitary warhead. So the RV itself, it looks like a delta-shaped RV instead of a conical. And it's designed to glide and do all kinds of maneuvers. But basically, I think it's hittable.
Yeah.
It might take a lot to hit it, but it's hittable because of what you said. We do have the sensor capability to detect from post boost, and you want to get it before it releases the RV. So if you can get the post boost vehicle bus, it's like hitting a strike. You get all the RVs on that bus. But the Russians do have a system like that. And I think recently in Congress, there was some talk about concern for some Russian nuclear space capability. Have you heard about that? Something in space that, I don't know if it's a ballistic missile defense by the Russians or an anti-satellite capability by the Russians.
What I understand is an anti-satellite capability. And that's so completely against international law. But I'm not surprised the Russians are pulling that stunt. I think we undoubtedly have the capability. We just don't talk much about it. But
Yeah.
I think your point's well taken. It's a maneuverability. With a ballistic missile, I was reading about this. If you get 2 points on the ballistic missile trajectory, you know exactly where it's going. Exactly. Now, if you have a maneuverable warhead, all bets are off. So it's a matter of maneuvering, but at the speed these things are going out in the atmosphere, they're a glowing infrared target. So it's not like they're stealth, as I understand it. It's not like they're stealth. They just have to be hit as soon in the trajectory as possible. The problem with hitting them in the post-boost phase, the boost phase is you'd have to have armed satellites over the country, and U.S. wouldn't tolerate that, and I'm sure Russia and China wouldn't. But once it's in the mid-course, then that's well over outside the range of the territory of the launching entity. So you have better chance of intercepting without annoying anybody. But yeah, the Russians have an anti-satellite capability.
I understand. And I think there's a cruise missile called Storm Petrel.
Yeah.
That's the Russian name for it. And I think we call it Skyfall, the NATO nickname, which has a nuclear propulsion, and it can stay up there forever. Basically, they skirt the outer space treaties by staying in the exoatmosphere, but below space, what we call space, and it can stay up there. And then when they need to use it, they can then pop it up. And then it becomes what's known as a fractional orbital bombardment system. It's becomes suborbital, and then it acts like an ICBM at that point. And that's how they like fine tune and skirt around the treaty. But I appreciate the I appreciate your presentation. It takes me back to my day job back in the old days.
Wow. Well, I guess I have a slightly jaundiced view of Russian capabilities. Their abysmal showing in the Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying people haven't died. I don't imply that that's okay. But when I heard they had invaded the Ukraine, I thought Ukraine's toast. They're gone. And they aren't, and they haven't been, and they may well never be. So when the Soviet Union, Russia talks about the Storm Petrel, I've got to confess, I kind of yawn and go, show me the money. But that's, again, just my skepticism. The Chinese, that's another story.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat. The first question is, in a real attack, is it likely that there will be many decoys? And what percentage of real warheads, or what percentage of real warheads versus decoys, and is there ability to distinguish between the two?
Okay, one thing, John, stay, I need to get your phone number. Well, let me give you my phone number. I'd like to have lunch sometime. I think we'd have fun talking.
Sure. Eleanor has my contact information. I'll contact Eleanor and
Yeah.
she can,
Okay, great.
I can connect you guys
You can-
afterwards, no problem.
yeah, sure. Thank
The
you.
decoy question is, the infrared sensors were developed to such a high capability that they could detect the subtle differences between the decoy and the reentry vehicle. And then the number would depend on the missile involved. That's one reason why Peacekeeper was so important, because it could launch so many reentry vehicles or decoys or a combination of the two. But yeah, from what I've seen, and this is ancient technology compared to what's available nowadays, the infrared signature, ultraviolet signature, combined with some radar information, pretty well determines which one can discriminate. It's called discrimination. Can pretty well discriminate between the decoys and the RVs.
Okay. Then another question we have is, was any of this technology used in the Israeli development of Iron Dome or Arrow systems?
Now that's a very good question, and I think I don't know, but based on the little I've tracked on this, I think there was a free exchange of information between the two countries, because the Iron Dome and Arrow work very similar to Patriot and THAAD, and it had great success. There was a cottage industry during the Cold War. It said, and I remember my dad, who's a plant biochemist, and he voiced his opinion that he had really no knowledge of, in my opinion, that there's no way you can hit a missile with a missile. It's just not physically possible. And there's no way you could prevent a mass raid from attacking the country successfully. Well, they had that 300 airframe raid on Israel that got 99 or a high percentage knocked out of the sky. So I would say you can hit a missile with a missile, and it's being done routinely now.
Any other questions from the floor? I think there might have been someone that had a question. Yeah.
I'm in the middle of a tremendous rainstorm.
Yes.
Are you getting hit too?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really coming down.
Monsoon season.
We had a tornado in Tucson
Oh my gosh.
a week or two ago. Yeah, a little one touched down. So we've been our virginity for being, if I can make that analogy, for being a safe, not Alabama or Georgia or someplace like that, a country that has tornadoes.
Yeah, I think no state is immune, technically. Any other questions? Any comments, questions?
I have one. I can answer the Aero Iron Dome because I was also the Aero analyst at CIA, and Raytheon provided a lot of the guidance technology, but the Aero missile airframe itself and the warhead was definitely Israeli.
Well,
the radars were Israeli, but Raytheon provided the guidance.
Thank you. Okay. All right. I think we're good. I'm going to go ahead and I think end this evening. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And if you are local to Warminster, please join us live at our open house on July 20th at the Fusion Warminster. We'd love to see you and meet you in person. Otherwise, we'll see you back in August for our next presentation, and looking forward to that one as well. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate your support. Have a good evening, and hope you guys don't float away with the rain there, John. All right. Thank you. Take care. Good evening, everybody.